Thank you very much, Tiffany, for inviting us to be here, and good afternoon to all, and good day to everyone online as well. So maybe first a few words on IATA, who we are and what we do under this aviation decarbonization background. So IATA is International Air Transport Association, and we're representing over 320 member airlines, which represent about 83% of the international air traffic. And as an industry itself, we have committed to reach net zero emission by 2050, that already back in 2021. And follow that, ICAO, so the UN Agency on International Aviation, has also its member states committed to net zero emission of the industry by 2050 in 2022. So on that ground, currently is now the action for us to put on the ground and make sure we work jointly with government and all the industry stakeholders along our supply chain to make that ambitious target happen. So with that, here is just to quickly show what we've been committed. And then apparently for industry to reach net zero emission by 2050 is not something given, right? Depends on like our nature of operation, and also as a sector itself, it's very hard to decarbonize. And top reasons are still, as of today, the industry is heavy resilient reliance on the fossil fuels in its operation and our expected growth in the coming years. And also what concerns us most is kind of the technology readiness level is low, in terms that all those electric aircraft and hydrogen-powered aircraft will not be coming to service in the foreseeable years. And so as you might be aware of as well, like most of the emissions aviation industry generated are from the long-haul flight, which requires a few additional years for this e-aircraft or the hydrogen-powered aircraft to operate those long-haul operations. So that's why it's kind of a challenge target for us, but we're exert every effort we can to reach that target by working with like everyone here in the room as well. And then we have a next slide. And here it's provides you a very straightforward view to see like which levers that will be jointly contribution to our net zero goal. And as you can see from the pie chart, it represents one of the scenarios whereby we identify how aviation sector can achieve this target, right? And you can see here the SAF representing here in the green portion is sustainable aviation fuels are constituted to 65% of that emission reduction by 2050. So that's basically our major lever right now we're looking forward to. And in addition to what we see here, if we take a look back, zoom in and see between now and 2030, it's worth to mention as well, last year in ICAO's CAFRI3, the Conference on Alternative Aviation Fuels, and all the member states there in ICAO have reached another kind of medium target going to say 5% of emission reductions by 2030 will be achieved through the use of SAF, LCAF, that's lower aviation carbon fuel, and also other cleaner energies by 2030. So that's kind of the in-between milestone. That's with this long-term contribution of SAF's emission reduction achievement and all those midterm ones I just highlighted. As you can see here, number as of today of SAF availability need to be scaled up very quickly. If we look now into long term again, what makes of this 65% represent around up to 500 million tons of SAF uplift annually. And if you look at numbers we're having today, it's kind of minimum to the extent of what we want to achieve in the future. And if we look at what does the commitment of 5% emission reduction goal of 2030, that also represents at least 14 million tons of SAF used by then. So it's highlights the urgency of government to take actions of further unlocking SAF's production capacity and also SAF supplies. And why we do not see those numbers take up as of today is still very minimum SAF availability we see here on the slides. I think there are primarily two reasons. First reason is when speaking of all those feedstock for SAF, we have the competitors. So that's the road transportations in the sense that they also need the same batch of fuel, the same batch of SAF SAF feedstock for them to generate or produce renewable diesels for road transportations. So nowadays, we see a lot of tendency of using that batch of feedstock for that purpose, as opposed to prioritize the limited availability of feedstock for SAF production. Pretty will come back to that in a more detailed illustration when we come to the pathways, so you have a better view on that ground. And the second one is like, when we talk about the emission reductions of SAF, we're talking about essentially two factors. The first factor is the volume of SAF. A second factor is the emission reduction factor of this SAF. And apparently, depending on the SAF pathways and all those production methodologies, the potential of SAF to achieve emission reductions varies. So what we're saying here, 65% just highlights importance as well for us to prioritize those what's so-called advanced SAF with higher emission reduction potentials. So we'll come back to that point again. Pretty will have better illustration. And then here is just some building blocks and to see how this SAF actually generate the emission reductions, because we know that after SAF being uplifted into the wings, into the aircraft, actually its emission factor is the same as the traditional fossil jet fuel. So what contribute to these emission reductions of SAF? So we have to look at the full life cycle of this SAF production, right? So in the sense that if you look at the graph in the at the right column hand, you can see that in terms of the SAF production as its life cycle, for example, here we have this very simplified illustration. Say if we use some biomass, and then in the growth of those crops will absorb the CO2 from atmosphere. And eventually those CO2 absorb and consumption will be quantified to this emission reduction of the SAF life cycle emission reductions. So that's how you see this, apart from the fact after it's uplifted into the wing, it emits the same, but somehow it's have those environment benefits throughout its full life cycle. I think that's also important to see, like you can see different stakeholders here along the supply chain of SAF. And then important to emphasize, SAF starts with the word sustainability, sustainable, or so it's important to ensure throughout the full supply chain of SAF, we have the robust system or certification scheme throughout the entire process to guarantee the robust sustainability portfolio throughout this whole process of different stakeholders involved. And for that, we have the internationally recognized bodies, for example, RSB, that's Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, and ISCC, that's International Sustainability and Carbon Certification Schemes. So all those schemes of such will be performed the certification throughout the entire process to guarantee a robust sustainability portfolio of SAF. Right, and here you can see as well in our IATA net zero roadmap, we picture, okay, what we need to achieve net zero. And the second question is how much those levers will be contributing. And here the interesting part you can see is the black light part. It's to say the contribution of each levers is not definite. It really depends on how fast we can unlock in those investments to leverage the best potential of each levers. And for example, here you see SAF with the proper and effective policy actions taken by different jurisdictions, we have much more hope of better unlocking SAF's emission reduction contribution to this roadmap. And while on the other end, if we do not see the proper and timely come into place investment, that kind of contribution will be substantially limited as well. In my communication earlier with the secretary here, it was mentioned to me an interesting question and say why the hydrogen does not contribute as much as expected. And the reason I just briefly touch upon it's because of the technology readiness is just not there yet. We're expecting that all those hydrogen aircraft will come into operation by 2035. And then apparently all those airworthiness certification will take a long time as well. For the airline's operation, you will be having this hydrogen aircraft in your fleet renewal phase by phase or step by step, starting from the fairly smaller size of the aircraft, which will be able to perform those short hauls or regional flights, as opposed to the long haul flight, which contribute to most of this emission problem of the industry. So that's why we're emphasizing on all those levers, the investment come up in the earlier stage to better unlock their potentials. And here you can see we're mapping out as well, as we're speaking today, the policy options either has already entered into effect or those government are setting the pipeline with the purpose to better unlock SAF potentials. Those strips you can see here is like kind of those jurisdictions contain both supply side policies and also demand side policies. And also the pink boxes here highlighted are representing those ones we recently observed, notably after that I just mentioned the ICAO Cafe 3 meeting. So in all those trends, what we see more and more is not a standalone supply policy like the incentives, or not a standalone demand side policy, let's say the mandate, right? But we're seeing more and more mixture of those policy approaches introduced by different regions and different jurisdictions. And another interesting trend we observe here is like, we're not only talking about volumetric target for SAF, but more and more countries take into account of the emission factors of SAF. Let's say how much potential these pathways of SAF can achieve into consideration in their policy setting. So those are all very positive tendencies we observe here. And the next question be, with all those policies either in place or like the jurisdictions, policymakers are considering in the pipeline, we have to come up along the way some building blocks to assessing the effectiveness of those policies. And this is essential to answer the question whether those policies actually achieve its intended purpose, right? In this sense, it's more like whether those policies are effective in unlocking the SAF supply and its production capacity. So I think most of those building blocks are not you're very familiarized with it, because we're also using the same set of metrics in assessing other renewable energy policies, for example, stability and predictability. But here, what I want to highlight is what we think is a bit unique now in this case, it's kind of stackability, right? So the stackability means like, because now the SAF, the price of SAF compared to the conventional aviation jet fuel is still like 2 to 4 times higher than the conventional jet fuel, which makes from operational or commercial perspective no sense for airlines to take those fuels because it's too expensive and it's not feasible for them to spend so much money on this one. So I think now the primary purpose for this policy should be stacked together and to jointly act to bring down the minimum sale price of SAF. So that will be helping airlines or the end users to develop and deploy all the SAF available. And to give you an example here, we think in the United States, we see a lot of stackable options work together to bring down the cost of SAF. For example, prior to Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, they already have the California state level low carbon fuel standard, which offer those credits. If these producers produce SAF, you can have some credits that you can trade on the carbon market that should give you a little bit more financial incentive to do so. And then with the blender tax credits and also the producer tax credit introduced by the IRA, we see further drop down of this minimum sale price of SAF. And after the IRA era, recently we see some other states level initiatives to give extra tax credits to SAF producers. For example, we see in Chicago, Illinois, and we see also in Washington states, there are some incentive for such. So all those actions joined together will make a difference. And also we'd like to see a little bit flexibility as well in the reviewing mechanism to have time-to-time observation of how these policies actually swing all those feedstocks, as we just mentioned, from renewable diesel to SAF, to make sure like they are actually operational sense effective. So that's, I'll leave it here and hand it to Preeti to give you more insights on the technology perspective stuff.
Thanks, Hugh. And it's a pleasure to be here in this room amidst all of you on this topic. My colleague just now mentioned about technology and feedstock neutrality and feedstock agnostic nature for production of SAF. When we look at SAF, as you can see on this busy slide, am I audible? Yeah, yeah. On this busy slide, there are 8 qualified ASTM qualified SAF production pathways available today, which are listed on this slide. But before we get into the details around those pathways and the complexities around them, I also want to highlight that when we look at SAF as the alternative fuels for aviation sector, and we look at the alternative fuels for road transport, the SAF has much more economical as well as technological constraints. When I say technological and economical constraints, this is because of the testing as well as certification requirement to ensure that safety considerations around SAF are taken care of before its use in the commercial aircraft. And once that certification is being done, then under ASTM, different pathways are being, brought together, as you can see on the slide. Other interesting thing on this 8 different pathways are they have ability to take different kind of feedstocks. Many of them take waste feedstocks, some take lipid-based feedstocks, other take starchy and carbohydrate feedstocks, and produce sustainable aviation fuel. The important parameter which is very, necessary to take into consideration is that these SAF pathways had different cost implications, different feedstock requirement, and chemistry of each pathway is different. And one of the most integral aspect to take care here is the product slate. All of these pathways which are listed on the slide and under different annex, the product slate is very different. So when you use these pathways to produce SAF, the product slate is a mixture of SAF as well as other product, apart from some process which like alcohol to jet, which can produce around 70 to 90% of product slate as SAF. So as a nation or as an economy, when we make a roadmap to use a certain SAF pathways, our feedstock availability and a complementary choice of technology is very important in that concern. And as aviation industry, I must also highlight the low 2 pathways of co-processing. By the way, co-processing is a pathway where you can use existing feedstock of lipids in the available refineries, which means it is a low-hanging fruit. And if through policy instrument, we can look into the rationalization of feedstock that can be diverted into the current existing refineries, within a very short span of time, we can expand the availability of sustainable aviation fuel, which is not even 1% today. If I go further and put all the feedstock into 3 key buckets and the policies around that. First bucket is lipids or fat oil grease, or FOG is generally called. Predominantly, most of the SAF from new pathways which is being produced today, most of that is coming from HEFA pathway. And in the next 5 to 10 years, we see that that is still going to be a key pathway because of the feedstock availability. But the constraint there is only a certain limit of availability of those fats, oils, and grease around the world. And there are different estimates ranging between 40 to 50 million tons of those feedstock available globally. So if we divert all of that feedstocks to produce SAF, it is not sufficient. But more important is ensuring that current supply chains are well integrated to expand the production. Then comes carbohydrates or starchy feedstocks, which can be converted into more energy-dense molecule like bioethanol, which we see is going to be a promising pathways in next, in near term because of the ethanol supply chain that can be expanded. But there is a rider. The rider is around sustainability. Most of the ethanol, if I look into the volumes, around 30 billion gallons around the world, most of it is today produced from the food crops. And when it comes to sustainability metrics, which is a requirement for SAF, all of that feedstocks may not qualify. It means there is a very strong opportunity that we can look into new pathways, like which can use cellulosic feedstocks or biomass feedstocks, which can unleash a significant potential. And that leads me to third pathways of solid waste. Globally, we are struggling today around 5 billion tons of biomass waste or 2 billion tons of municipal solid waste. And under ASTM pathways, there are technology available which can use these waste carbon feedstocks and convert that into sustainable aviation fuel. but we don't see significant volumes because supply chains are not well integrated. So which is very important for the success of SAF. You mentioned about the life cycle emission benefits. For the benefit of all, when we talk about life cycle emissions, it starts from the time the feedstock is being produced in a field, aggregated, collected, and then transformed into sustainable aviation fuel, and that fuel is being used in an aircraft. And also the grid intensity, carbon intensity is also taken into consideration to arrive at LCA benefits. HEFA is a predominant pathway, as I shared with you, and you can clearly see when you use canola and when you use used cooking oil, how significant can be the difference in terms of the life cycle emission benefits. So obviously, we know where to make the choices in terms of making these feedstocks available. Similarly, in terms of alcohol to jet, there are agriculture residue where the supply chains are still missing. I do see a lot of commitments around the world to build those supply chains, but those supply chains which are right now in place are not enough. So certainly we need more momentum there. But I want to highlight the opportunity here in this room for all of us as a global fraternity. The opportunity lies in the forestry residue, municipal solid waste, which are challenged for every economy, despite it is a developing or whether it is a developed economy. So somewhere through the right policy instruments for what we are doing today, what we need in the near term and what we need in the longer term, we can help to build these strong supply chains. We can certainly unleash a significant volume of SAF availability, almost doubling, tripling the volumes. And I must highlight the huge challenge as the aviation industry we see. Within a span of 26 years, from now till 2050, we need almost 1,000-time increase in the SAF production from where we are today. We should not look at SAF just as a chemical molecule or a molecule which is a drop-in fuel to be used in the existing aircraft. Rather, I would like to take a step back and we should start looking at SAF as a molecule which has a potential to deliver social, economical, environmental, and sustainability aspects and benefits to us. If we can look and work on SAF in those aspects, certainly aviation industry will not be saying that we don't have SAF availability because demand is already there. It's a time we work together to unleash the supply channels. This is the last slide from both of us. And before we thought of being here, we were wondering why this topic of SAF is in this room today. I think thanks to the organizers, this is the right time to discuss this topic in this room. First, from the feedstock availability, not only strengthening the feedstock availability, I would say optimizing feedstock availability also. And I would expand it there. When I say strengthening, when you look at the abundant available feedstock in the form of biomass or municipal solid waste, definitely we need to come together. Or even for the lipids which are there, how we can channelize availability of that lipids. And mobility should be seen as one sector. Mobility shouldn't be seen as a aviation separate and road transport sector. And we should try to allocate these feedstocks for the sectors which are hard to decarbonize, and aviation is certainly one sector. Second comes the optimizing. I do understand and recognize different country has different socioeconomic priorities. But when I look at the SAF and we look at the decarbonization as one unit, sometimes having biomass use for CBG, biomass use for power generation, biomass use for ethanol generation, and biomass use for SAF generation, it can give conflicting and confusing message in the market. So probably it's a need of ours that we streamline that kind of messaging and look at hard to decarbonize sector. Technology transfer is second most important part because if feedstock contributes around 60% of cost of SAF production, without technology, we can't succeed. And technology is not distributed uniformly across the world. There comes the role of technology transfer between economies which are developed or maybe economies which are evolving. And the best model can be you transfer technology, you lower the barrier of technology transfers because trade barriers in this room, I think all of you know more than us. They can be multifaceted in terms of custom barriers, trade barriers, tariff barriers, or even providing financing to the new technologies. So technology transfer, putting that barrier down and coupling that with the localization so that the economy can use local resources of people and engineering to build the SAF plant can really help this industry to grow and meet the decarbonization and net zero aspirations of aviation industry.
Yeah. Thank you, Preeti. So the very last 2 points we think would be interesting to have some further discussion in this room with experts here is, first of all, like SAF, as we just mentioned, all those emission reductions are achieved through the life cycle. And then that means all those environment attributions of SAF can decoupled from the physical existence of the fuel itself, in the sense also that after blending with the conventional aviation jet fuel, it's impossible to trace all those molecules from SAF. So in that sense, the environment attribution of SAF is a standalone commodities that can be traded. So we think there are some important, interesting discussion we can be put here, because for airlines to claim all those environment attribution of SAF, we need a accounting system with robust chain of custody. Here we're thinking of the book and claim, whereby we see a lot of application of such in the green electricity field already, right? By generating all those green certificate, for example. And we also need that to make SAF happen and to scale up the use of SAF by trading those commodities we just talked about. And the very last point is here, because we're talking about the future effective policies that used to unlock the SAF supplies. And we think it's very important for government to play a more active role to de-risk the investment of SAF production. And then here we see more and more countries are consider the what's so-called the contract for difference. And in its essence, it's a revenue certainty mechanism, which ensures the SAF producers will get the certain amounts of revenues back in their trade of or in their production of SAF. In the super simple way, the government will be top up all those price if the price of sale falls short of the strike price being agreed between the government and the SAF producers. So we want to also discuss with you as well, are there any kind of state subsidy element in all those contract for difference as the policy in facilitating SAF. So we'll leave our intervention here, and we really look forward to have your insights and discussion on this topic.